Okay, this webinar is being recorded. Hi, welcome. This is our third CTE Spotlight webinar series in honor of CTE Month, which is February. And upon entry, you all should be muted when you enter the room. We will not be able to hear you, and it looks like most of you, we can't see you either, and that's okay. I am just doing a quick introduction. I'm here from the Napa County Office of Education, and we are your CTIG Region 3 Technical Assistance Provider. And we are so happy to host Erik Rice today from San Francisco Unified School District, and I'll let him introduce himself. He's going to be sharing the power of Capstone projects with us today and how they do them in San Francisco and how they support their teachers in making jaw-dropping capstone projects. So I'm going to stop talking and let Erik take it from here. We are being recorded and everything will be shared out with you all after. All right, take it away, Erik.
Great. Thanks, Lacey. Hi, everybody. Nice to not really meet you because I'm not really meeting you right now, but it's nice to have you all here, and maybe we'll have a chance to communicate a little bit during the webinar. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, see if I'm doing this correctly. Okay, so great. I'm realizing, Lacey, I don't see the comment thing, so we're going to wing it here. So the focus for the session, as indicated, we in San Francisco Unified have been really excited to rally around this concept of capstones as not just as a powerful project, but also as a really just key focus for our professional development, driving a lot of our learning together, and a key pivot point for our system. And so hopefully you'll see in this presentation, not only how we're thinking about capstones and how we're qualifying them, but also how we're thinking about it as something bigger within the system. We're going to start off by a brief video that our district put together as we are trying to really rally around overall performance-based assessment. So I'm going to show this a little bit, gives you a little bit of context for what we're doing.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nora Isawi.
My name is Saul Soto, and I'm a senior at June Jordan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Tupul.
I'm a graduating senior at John O'Connell High School.
Welcome to my senior thesis presentation.
Today I'm going to present about what I learned this semester in English class.
Today I will be presenting my research on antibiotic resistance, also known as what doesn't kill bacteria makes them stronger.
Nora has always been a passionate and really engaged student. She's deeply interested in the health field. This project really allows the individual students to explore their own passions and interests and go through a process of deep inquiry.
So today I will be going over the statement of the problem. I will present existing solutions to this problem, my own proposed solutions. I will also present a conclusion and reflection, and we will have time at the end for questions that I will be happy to answer.
We first had to choose the topic that we wanted to do. We just had to do a lot of research on our own, like online, or go out to our communities, or like where the issue is affecting our communities and be able to gather data from there.
He did a topic that's obviously of interest to him, how he can relate that to his academics in terms of preparing an entire research paper, and just how he also plans on using that in his post-secondary plans, I think really show how he's thought about what that looks like. And it also gives a chance for him to talk about that in a different way that other ways of assessing that wouldn't show.
My whole research project was how boxing could help other individuals from other communities. And I inferred that if we introduce boxing to other kids from like the more disadvantaged communities, then they'll also be able to gain all of these benefits that boxing has to offer.
One of the things that's really special about the oral defense format is that students who are not as articulate always can be drawn out because we have that 20 minutes of one-on-one time together. the teacher and the other students in the panel can really ask follow-up questions that like give students an opportunity to really show what they learned.
One advantage of figurative language is it shows many ideas in a short sentence, and some disadvantage is it's hard to understand.
I've been teaching as a certified for 12 years. I've been through the high stakes casing years where it was the one test that students had to pass. And I was frequently seeing students really internalize a sense of failure when they couldn't pass. And I rarely saw it really inspire and motivate any kind of joyful learning. And that was hard as a teacher. It was hard to stand behind that and try to push students through that process. Whereas this has been completely different because students are able to pursue something that they're interested in, that they're passionate about, and they're engaging in an authentic, real-world task that will be very useful no matter what they do in life.
It definitely changed the way I think of myself. I improved my public speaking skills, my communication skills, my research skills, and it's really helpful to me because I know how important it is in college and as a future doctor and professor.
This process is especially good for English learners because even though we work really hard to keep them practicing English orally all year long, like this is the time when I've heard like the most English from our students.
1 year ago, like I didn't understand nothing about English. I feel confident, speaking. Like teacher is asking questions and I am trying my best to answer. It makes me feel proud and confident because I know that I am improving in learning English.
This teaches you how to have more of like a public voice, to be able to speak to other people. And this is like a good way to be able to like have everything on your mind, bring it out and give it to an audience and allow them to understand.
To watch the students push themselves through that process with the support of the adults has been a very powerful experience as an educator.
If we want to create students that are ready to really take on the world, it's really important that they have all the experiences to develop in ways that's not just towards academics, but is that really geared to creating change in our communities and change in San Francisco that our students need. They're the ones that are going to be driving our future.
Great. So hopefully that gave a little bit of a glimpse as to what we're really aspiring for in San Francisco. A major culminating project at the end. Something the video certainly shows our aspirations of where we're really trying to head across our pathways and actually within our schools. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But just to get a little bit of terminology, some common terminology, when we talk about Capstone, because that might be different in different contexts, we really, in our pathways, we really think of this as a culminating industry-driven project that's required during the final year of a pathway or academy. And we're really pushing on that aspect of critical thinking and problem solving. It's an opportunity for students to really apply that previous knowledge and experience from their pathway, but really in a new and novel situation. We're trying to get away from the idea of the end is simply a reflection back of what they experienced, or a regurgitation or a review of here's what I did, but really applying that into a new and novel situation. The idea of building ideally on work-based learning experiences. So increasingly, our pathways are setting up job shadows that are part of the school day, and worksite rotations and internships that are more personalized and individualized and advanced. And the idea for our students to experience that on the earlier end and let that build the curiosity for what they might want to pursue in their research and in their capstone project. And something that really pushes on their ability to deeply understand something a real world challenge. And again, that becomes all the more doable if it's building off of a real experience they've had out in the community, not something that's just been supported within a classroom context. And lastly, we see it as a longer term project. We don't want this being something that's just at the end of the year that just kind of like gets thrown out there for the last week, but it really is something that students are deeply going through over the course of several months. It doesn't necessarily mean they're working on it every day of several months, but it really has that longer term sustained focus. So some examples of some of the really kind of cool capstone questions we've seen students take on, and you'll probably be able to see the different sectors that are represented here. We saw a student in a biotech pathway take on the question of how might we apply biotechnology to create biodegradable feminine hygiene products. And they took, original research that had been done, not in that particular area, but they had to take that and apply it into a new situation. So they had some proposed scientific solutions that they had to defend. How might we best accommodate the storage needs for owners of tiny houses? So that came from our building and construction trades pathway at John O'Connell High School that was open-ended, did not have a right or wrong answer to it, but they had to justify it, design something, and defend it in front of their community. How might our school use current water technologies to lower water usage by 20%? So that was taking something in an environmental science or environmental technology pathway, and they'd studied water technology and around lowering water usage, but they had to apply that to a new and novel situation that was important to them. And so they had stakeholders they had to talk to, they had to really understand the site needs, et cetera. The one on the, to what extent is, is the mission, our health services and the mission as a district in San Francisco, are they meeting the mental health needs of recent immigrants? So this was an important example that we showed a lot of our health pathways, because what we were getting for a while were things like, a student deciding they wanted to focus on depression because that was something that was important to them, but it became a report about depression, which they could really get that answer, out of, a few Google sites, and, easy resources online. And we really wanted them to apply that to something that would require them to talk to stakeholders and, be a real professional in the field. And then you'll see the game design one around, changing behavior through game design. So they had to create a game. So just to give a little bit of San Francisco context, we have a larger vision 2025, our sort of collective vision for what we hope for our learners by the year 2025, what we imagine learning to look like by 2025 within most of our, or all of our classrooms. And the main piece of that is our North Star of our graduate profile. And I know, increasingly districts are rallying around a graduate profile, but the capstone is a great way of taking the graduate profile and doing more with it than simply dusting it off for when the WASC comes through, looking for our student learning outcomes, but actually making these 21st century skills really operational. So we are aspiring to create rubrics for the capstone. We're not there yet, but rubrics that would align to these criteria areas. When we have worked with our teachers around what makes a high quality capstone, we've adapted these criteria. It's adapted from Buck, so much of the language should look familiar if you're familiar with the Buck Institute's work, or is it PBL? Oh, they're newly branded.
PBL Works.
PBL Works. So this was adapted. We felt like the way they had described it was really helpful, but there were some areas that we wanted to push on that weren't quite pushed on in the way we had hoped. So we've adapted the PBL Works or Buck Institute project criteria. You'll see empathic design for transformative change. So we felt like that was a really important thing to push on locally within our capstone projects and really any of our projects. So we're starting to build some language around that. So when we do our professional development with our teachers, we've been reinforcing these 8 areas as elements of a high quality capstone task. Because we've said, if you really are expecting amazing outcomes from your students, then we really need to have a high quality task being required in the first place. So if these are overall criteria, at the end of the day, Lacey gave the punchline away, I think, at the beginning of the webinar, using the term jaw-dropping. But we've said, at the end of the day, through all that criteria and through any rubrics, when we see what a student has produced, is it jaw-dropping? Do we have this reaction of like, I can't believe you're a high school student. That's unbelievable that you've produced that you've defended that this original idea, this game-changing idea or real prototype or a real product, a real solution, and to have that reaction in the audience or otherwise of, I can't believe you're a high school student. So we've kind of used left and right the idea of just simplifying it to jaw-dropping, which means that if we expect a jaw-dropping product for our students, then we're pushing on our teachers and our administration and our central office to support jaw-dropping tasks. Now, our main premise that we've used when we think about capstones in terms of how it fits in the system is really builds off of understanding by design. So if we think of in a understanding by design unit or project design, the idea of defining our goals and determining our priorities first, mapping backwards from there and identifying what we want to see students producing, and then behind that, what are the learning activities? So this idea of planning backwards, we've used when we've talked about the capstone. So in our project-based system, we think of the capstone as being a main pillar of that system. If by the end of 12th grade, this is a major marker of college, career, and we would say community readiness, if that's a major lens into that as a way of showing this sort of readiness for 4-year, this readiness for 2-year, this readiness for direct entry into employment, and then our nice little mix of what really happens in the real world for our graduates, we're saying, how do we cast a spotlight on the capstone itself? So we bring in these partners from all these different institutions. They come in and they not only sit in on our capstone, they sit in on our capstone assessments, so they're part of the audience. They are increasingly part of a pool of mentors for students for those projects. And even earlier than that, during our summer planning time, we have many of these partners sit in with our teachers to evaluate the capstone task in the first place and other projects to determine whether those are well aligned. So we found the capstone. I'm realizing that I'm going like this, and this doesn't really do you much good when I'm just kind of pointing around with my fingers. So I'll use the mouse. If we put a special lens on here, we feel like it brings a substance to the conversation and an opportunity for alignment with our post-secondary partners. So then just to kind of show you how we're beginning to think about this as, again, as a system. If we have a 12th grade capstone, what if we had an 8th grade capstone and a 5th grade capstone? And we start to build that language in as a system. So we right now have 3 or 4 of our middle schools that are designing out their first 8th grade capstones. What if in the high school, we are rallying around this 12th grade capstone, and that pushes the other end of grade level final moments in their system? And so this happened at John O'Connell High School, which is a wall-to-wall pathways school. Every senior, every junior is in a pathway. So they've got their capstone senior defense, which you saw some highlights from the video from the Health Academy, that they, after a while, said, that's great, but what about our 11th graders? What are we doing in 11th grade to really get them ready? And so now they have their 11th grade inquiry project, or they call it the junior investigation. So it has a life form beyond just an individual teacher decides to do a cool project. And now they're starting to think about, is there an end of 10th grade, major rite of passage or something that goes between 10th and 11th grade. And then we think about it within a school year. So if the capstone is at the end and there's going to be this deep inquiry, student-driven thing, we're using this graphic with our teachers to say, okay, that's all well and good, but that can't be the first time in that year that we're asking students to do those kinds of behaviors. And so how does that same process, those same project-based behaviors, how do they show up in our other units or our other projects? And so the broader context, we set this up during some major change process at one of the schools, was we created this sort of theory of action, which meant at the top of it is our student learning outcomes. What do we really aspire to for our students at the end of whatever? At the end of a unit, at the end of a project, at the end of a year, at the end of, let's just take at the end of senior year. These are the outcomes we really want to see. So underneath that, supporting that, are the learning behaviors. What are the behaviors that we want to see students exercising and demonstrating on a regular basis when we walk through classrooms that shows they're actually moving toward those outcomes. So if we have as a district critical thinking and problem solving and collaboration as our kind of classic, graduate profile or 21st century skills, but we are generally walking into classrooms and seeing students sitting at desks pretty passively face forward, then we've got a disconnect there between our learning behaviors and our outcomes. So we've used this as a way to push on that. If those are the learning behaviors we want to see, then what are the adult behaviors that we want to see that are supporting those student learning behaviors? So this is where project-based learning comes in. This is where a strong project task comes in, and those instructional moves on a daily basis to support those student learning behaviors. Underneath that, we said, what are the structures and conditions that have to be in place so that the adults can do what they need to do? So this is why we make master schedule changes, adult collaboration time, bell schedule, etc. But in the context of Capstone, this is why if we really want to go big on Capstone and we really want to do it well, then we need professional development around project-based learning in Capstone. It's why we need to devote time in our calendar. So all three of those schools that were featured in the video, they kind of pause their calendar for a week for these major defenses and exhibitions and showcase. And so the idea is that's a structure, that's a condition that actually supports the adults first, because the adults now have a forum for this high stakes student performance. And then underneath that, we say, what are the leadership practices and policies and resource allocation for that structure those structures and conditions to exist in the first place. So, changing a calendar is a leadership move and not without, some level of pushback. So those are, decisions that have to be made. So to summarize, so for us, in terms of, and then we'll open it up, I think, to some questions. When we've talked about structures and conditions in San Francisco, for Capstone specifically, some of the areas that we focus on include professional development. So the idea of, we do a 4-day project-based learning boot camp right after school lets out. It's well-timed, not in terms of exhaustion because our teachers are zonked, but we kind of refresh them around already planning for next year, and they're coming right off of those capstones. So it's an opportunity to look at student work. And so we give them a 4-day, it's got curriculum, it's got some areas that they can choose into to focus on to kind of fine-tune their capstone or other project task. And then, like I said, we have business industry partners that come in to give some feedback during that time. We also pay them for a couple of additional planning days in June to finish their deliverables. During the school year, we have a couple of professional developments to further tune their projects and capstones. And then another essential structure condition that we've begun to push on more is the idea of interdisciplinary teams, that the capstone is not simply owned by one teacher. It should be, by definition, an interdisciplinary task. So our English teachers who are have it within their curriculum to be teaching research in the second semester, it's a really great crossover for an English teacher and a CTE teacher to be combining forces on a capstone. Ideally, more teachers are involved, but that's a kind of an easy interdisciplinary start. The idea of focusing on quality indicators, so that shared language, as I showed those 8 areas, we ask teachers to self-assess on those each year and also to pick like 2 or 3 of those for any project or their capstone, kind of which are their 2 or 3 that they really want to hone in on and zoom in on for their capstone. I mentioned earlier the involvement of business, industry, and post-secondary partners as part of the audience, as part of mentors, and as part of informing the curriculum itself. And then lastly, is the idea of make it a thing. If it's something that just sits within an individual teacher's classroom, it doesn't give the life that we think that capstones deserve. It needs the buzz, it needs media, it needs a lot of district-wide marketing. So the idea of a school-wide senior defense is one example. Capstone exhibitions that might be not quite as high stakes as a senior defense, but still creates a life to it. And we've had increasingly our industry partners hosting capstones themselves. So the trade-off on that one is that you have only a class of students going and presenting at an industry partner, which gives a great location, but it doesn't create a school-wide buzz. My bias is for school-wide buzz because then they're the ones owning it. It doesn't become a central office CTE thing. It's a school-wide investment. So I think I'm gonna, I guess some planning considerations, and then we'll open up to some questions. One is to just spend some time with your teams doing some visualizing. What are those high priority outcomes you really want to see? What are those behaviors, and what might that final moment look like? And can we calibrate on just this idea of jaw dropping? Like, what does that mean within our individual pathway? Do we have shared expectations across a school or across a network of pathways? Really unpack that, because you might be surprised to find that, or maybe not so surprised, but we found that one teacher's definition of jaw dropping is very far from mine or other teachers' definition of jaw dropping. And so we try to create some space to calibrate on that. And then to think about what you can build on. What are current examples that are happening in schools that can serve as a foundation? We've really tried to message that it's not necessarily reinventing everything. In some cases, it needs to be, but in a lot of cases, Pathways have done some pretty exciting things near the end, but they need to be elevated. They need to have more student voice and choice than maybe like everyone's taking on the same topic, but there's still something strong to build on. And then to think about who should be really part of that conversation. If it's just about us coaching individual teachers, then I feel like it doesn't have the same impact for the system. If it's us bringing in all those different partners, bringing in site administration to think about it as a site-wide thing, that this is what we do, I think it has a lot more power. That was a whole lot of stuff. I'd love to open it up to some questions. Lacey, do you know about how many people we have on? Is it something we can go audio with, or?
Yeah, we have about 7 participants on. So there was a question, Eric, in the chat. Someone asked, are the projects required or optional? If you could address that. Yeah, so from a central office standpoint, which I guess I never really introduced myself very much, but I'm director of college and career pathways for San Francisco. So I and our team help support about 40 plus pathways in our district. And our communication with our pathways is that, yes, it's a requirement for the pathways to do capstones as part of their program of study. Now, we've got a whole spectrum right now developmentally around where those capstones are. Some are still being instituted as essentially a class project that are being sort of elevated a bit more, whereas others are getting to more of that model that we're hoping to see of more individualized, student-driven inquiry and problem solving. In terms of, there's another way that you may be asking that, I think it's Dan, is that, are the students required? Is it like a graduation requirement of students? And at the schools that you saw in the video, they would say, yes, it's a graduation requirement. And they do that in a, like for John O'Connell, the English teacher and the social studies teacher are part of that. A student must pass English 12 and econ government in order to graduate. And so those grades are incorporated into the capstone. And so that's a way of calling it a graduation requirement. I've also seen some schools that have used it as, you must pass in order to walk, or things like that. Pasadena Unified has gone to capstones as by board policy, a graduation requirement within all their pathways. So we're starting to look at that district as a direction we may head. So I hope, Dan, that may have covered a spectrum of different possibilities within your question. Thank you. So if you're on and you have any questions or thoughts, you can unmute yourself by clicking. On your end, it will probably be on the bottom left. I think there's a little mute icon, or unmute if you're muted. So you can click on that and unmute yourself and ask something, or as a few of you are doing, you can use the chat. And the chat box down at the bottom on your toolbar, there's a little chat icon. If you don't see your chat box, if you click on that, the chat should come up. And Eric, if you're on it, we have another question that came, or a thought, I think it's a question. I love the holistic approach, especially the need to make it a thing, CTE in my area still tends to take the back seat to existing college path focus. How did leadership buy-in occur, or was it already present because of Wall-to-Wall Academy?
Yeah, so I definitely don't want to over romanticize where we're at right now. So there's probably a lot that we've got going on that will look like what you have. We still see CTE as, in many cases, I don't know if I would go lower status, maybe a little bit lower status in our community, but I think we've done a nice job within San Francisco of elevating that. But at the end of the day, in terms of where administrative energy goes and sort of prioritizing this, we're still not fully there. I think, over the last couple of years, I've started to work with a couple of, a cohort of high schools that we've called ourselves the wall-to-wall cohort. And that administration, I convened those 4 schools several times during the year as like a pathway leadership series. And we've used this as a major lens of our focus together, looking at capstones, thinking about capstones and project-based learning, and understanding the different qualities of a more linked learning approach to CTE that really brings in the core academic and the CTE together. So I think that has helped raise the status of it. The other piece is I've taken people to go see things. So even at John O'Connell, where I had done some work more on the ground with them, I took them to my former school, Life Academy in Oakland, where we had done this same example there, and took stakeholders to see it and see the power of what student products can be. And I had teachers from San Francisco that went and saw my students at Life Academy, which is part of Oakland Unified School District, and the school is in deep East Oakland. And a majority of students who are, qualify for free and reduced lunch, coming from a ton of trauma. And I had teachers from San Francisco go in and say things like, well, Erik, that was really powerful. That was really great. But, those aren't our kids. I'm like, you can't play that card here. You can't play those aren't my kids. So it led to this deep conversation to go see some powerful models out there.
Thank you. Any other questions? Again, feel free to unmute yourself or add to the chat, or any thoughts you might have. And while we wait, I have a question, Erik. If I were a teacher on here listening to you right now, and similar to Clinton's question, and I'm blown away, and I would love for my admin to get on this train, but let's say I'm just here alone, right, as a teacher. What would you recommend I do within my capacity as a teacher who's drinking your Kool-Aid, but I don't have power in any other format?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily start with the big systemic PBL PowerPoint on that one, because that may scare some people off. It may inspire some, but it might scare others off. So that's a great question, because it can feel really overwhelming and feeling like, to maybe Clinton, to your point, this idea that how do I sort of get everybody on board and get a leadership investment in this? And one of the things that I found is if you take the bright spots. So if I'm an individual teacher, and I'm actually, it's funny because I'm working on this with my kid's 8th grade teacher. I'm trying to push his middle school to do an 8th grade capstone. And so I met with his, I know. So I met with his English teacher, who is pretty enthusiastic, but doesn't feel like she has sort of administrative support. I'm like, okay, but you have a project that this can evolve into. She agreed. So we had that. Said, okay, let's do that, and let's create some buzz around that project. Let's create an audience. Let's ask people to come in and look at it and serve on the panel for it. So other teachers at the school, district administrators, site administrators from other schools, whoever it is you feel like you want in the room. Obviously to a point where you're not putting too much pressure on that teacher, but I think to say, look, to the extent that you're open to it, let's get people to come check out and be thought partners with you. Not here, I've done it and this is the end all be all, but hey, I'm doing this. I think it has promise for something that others may want to tap into. And what happens is I found is that when people go and see what's happening for students, it creates an intellectual and emotional response. What Chip Heath in the book Switch, which everybody should read, around motivating the elephant and creating that emotional connection to a change that may still feel overwhelming.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, and I know Erik has to leave early at 4:15 today, so we have 10 more minutes if anyone else has any questions or thoughts. Clinton did add, thank you. I like the in-person idea as well to impact people's vision, so seeing it in action. Awesome.
If anybody wants to come down to any of our defenses, you know, I don't know why, down, up, over, wherever, and however you orient your map. If anyone wants to come in and be part of any of our defenses, we're always looking for panelists, right? It's a value add for any of our teachers, and it gives you a glimpse, again, not as like the end all be all, this is the best thing since sliced bread, but it can give you a sense of what it could look like.
Thank you for the offer. And do you present to stakeholders meetings or other public forums? So I think like in my local area, like your Rotary clubs or your chamber mixer type things, do you utilize those?
If it's, depending on what the ask is. So if it's referring to like involving them in the capstones themselves, then full-fledged, I mean, my central team is like, that's their major work right now, is to bring in additional business and industry partners to be part of the mentoring, to be part of panels. It's the same folks we're asking for job shadows, and but it's actually a nice, easy way to bring somebody in as part of an audience for a one-time or two-time shot before they're hosting a job shadow. And they're like, oh, high school students, they're pretty cool. And that's very different than them coming in as a guest speaker, which I think can be a more traditional way of starting the relationship. So we have advisory boards for each of our sectors. And so, and we have teachers on special assignment that support those. And so they are constantly generating buzz and interest from those board members. And then, you know, with our school board and others, media, we tend to publicize these as well. I'm not sure if that's what Clinton was getting at, but.
Thank you. And Sandy said she'd love to come to the capstone presentations. And yes, I can get info on that from Erik. I can be a liaison. Or, I mean, Erik, do you have any dates off the top of your head you know of that will be happening in spring? Yeah,
and I think the most well-tuned model for CTE pathways, as most of our participants would know, is John O'Connell High School that really does this formal senior defense. And theirs is, I want to say, it's near the end of April, beginning of May. I think it's April 29th to May 2nd, Monday through Thursday.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And they typically will do like a half day. And so we would have you come in, we'd have you sign up, and either to be in one room the whole time for multiple student defenses, or to maybe rotate you to a couple of different pathways. They have 4 different pathways there.
So I can help organize something around that if people are interested. We have an upcoming tour of New Tech High, so I can do something similar for the capstone projects, maybe like work with you on date and logistics and stuff and open it up to our region.
Yep.
Thanks for that ask, Sandy. Okay, any other questions, thoughts? Feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself and chat with us verbally, orally.
Bye, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah.
No problem. Again, this is being recorded, and I'll email everyone with the recording and the presentation as well, so you can have access to it later. Glad you're enjoying these. That was the goal. And there's Erik's contact, so feel free to bug him too directly.
Happy to discuss.
All right, last call. Okay, thank you, Erik. Just a big, huge thank you for sharing your expertise and your experience with capstones, how you guys are doing it where you are. It's amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lacey.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. Stop.